Hello, I welcome you to this Big Data and HBase Essential Training. This is the first lecture in Chapter 1, Introducing HBase, and Lesson 1, The Rise of HBase. So, in general, this course is going to cover base aspects of HBase solution and also big data technologies in general. So, before we take a deep dive into it, let us set up our context right by exploring some key landmarks in the history that led to the birth of NoSQL. From Inktomi, probably the first true search engine, to Google, the present world leader, the computer scientists have well recognized the limitations of the traditional and widely used RDBMS, specifically related to the issues of scalability, parallelization, and cost. Also noting that the dataset is minimally cross-referenced as compared to the chunked transactional data, which is mostly fed to RDBMS. Specifically, if we take the case of Google that gets billions of requests a month across applications that may be totally unrelated in what they do, but related in how they deliver. The problem of scalability is to be solved at each layer, right from the data access to final delivery. Google therefore had to work innovatively and gave birth to a new computing ecosystem from which NoSQL is an important part. Now that we have a fair idea on how this side of the world evolved, let us examine what NoSQL is and what is it not. NoSQL is a generic term used to refer to any data store that does not follow the traditional RDBMS model. Specifically, the data is not relational and it does not use SQL as a query language. It is used to refer to databases that attempt to solve the problems of scalability and availability against that of atomicity or consistency. NoSQL is not a database. It is not even a type of database. In fact, it is a term used to filter out a set of databases out of this ecosystem. There are several distinct family trees available. Traditional RDBMS applications have focused on ACID transactions. Whatsoever indispensable these qualities may seem, they are quite incompatible with availability and performance on applications on web scale. For example, if a company like Amazon were to use a system like this, imagine how slow it would be. If I proceed to buy a book and a transaction is on, I will lock a part of the database, specifically the inventory, and every other person in the world will have to wait until I complete my transaction. This just doesn't work. Amazon may use cached data or even unlocked records, resulting in inconsistency. In an extreme case, you and I may end up buying the last copy of a book in the store, with one of us finally receiving an apology email. Well, Amazon definitely has a much better system than this. The point I am trying to make here is we may have to look beyond ACID to something called BASE, which was coined by Eric Brewer. Basic availability means each request is guaranteed a response, successful or failed execution. Soft state means the state of the system may change over time, at times without any input, for eventual consistency. Eventual consistency means the database may be momentarily inconsistent, but will be consistent eventually. Eric Brewer also noted that it is impossible for a distributed computer system to provide consistency, availability, and partition tolerance simultaneously. This is more commonly referred to as the CAP theorem. Note, however, that in cases like stock exchanges or banking, where transactions are critical, cached or state data will just not work. So, NoSQL is definitely not a solution to all the database-related problems. So, why NoSQL? NoSQL databases have a lot more to offer than just solving the problems of scale, which are mentioned as follows. Schemaless data representation. Almost all NoSQL implementations offer schemaless data representation. This means that you don't have to think too far ahead to define a structure, and you can continue to evolve over time, including adding new fields or even nesting the data, for example in case of JSON representation. If we're talking about the development time, I have heard stories about reduced development time because one doesn't have to deal with complex SQL queries. Do you remember the join query that you wrote to collect the data across multiple tables to create your final view? This is where NoSQL could come in handy also. If we were to talk about speed, even with the small amount of data that you have, if you can deliver in milliseconds rather than hundreds of milliseconds, especially over mobile and other intermittently connected devices, you have much higher probability of you winning users over. Plan ahead for scalability. And yeah, you read it right. Why fall into the ditch and then try to get out of it? Why not just plan ahead so that you never fall into one? Or in other words, your application can be quite elastic. It can handle some sudden spikes of load. Of course, you win user over straight away. The buzz around NoSQL still hasn't reached its peak, at least to date. We see more offerings in the market over time. The following table is a list of some of the more mature, popular, and powerful NoSQL databases segregated by data model used. This list is by no means comprehensive, nor does it claim to be. One of the positive points about this list is that most of the databases in the list are open source and community driven. So, to wrap it up, in this lesson we learned about the fundamentals of NoSQL. What is it all about, and more critically, what is it not? We took a splash in the history to appreciate the reasons and science behind it. You are recommended to explore the web for historical events around this to take a deep dive in appreciating it. NoSQL is not a solution to each and every application. It is worth noting that most of the products do throw away the traditional ACID nature, giving way to base infrastructure. Having said that, some products stand out. CouchDB and Neo4j, for example, are ACID-compliant NoSQL databases. Adopting NoSQL is not only a technological change, but also change in mindset, behavior, and thought process, meaning that if you plan to hire a developer to work with NoSQL, he or she must understand the new models. So, thank you very much for your attention, and we'll see each other again in the next lesson. Goodbye.